YouTube. This is Chris Saxman coming to you live from the home office, obviously, given the background here. And joining me is Mark Mix with the National Right to Work Foundation. Mark, why don't you tell us who you are and what the National Right to Work Foundation does?
Yeah, Chris, thanks for the opportunity to be on with you today and share with you a little bit about right to work and what's happening, not only in Virginia, but here in Washington, D.C. Hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that too. But the National Right to Work Committee has been around since 1955. Our primary mission is to help workers exercise their rights in America's workplace. We believe that every worker should have the right to join a union, but no one should be forced or lose their job if they choose not to participate in a union. And since 1947, Virginia's been a right to work state. That status as a right to work state is really in a dogfight right now with the elections that are coming up, with the positions of Terry McAuliffe, who would sign a repeal of the right to work law if he gets the chance, and Glenn Youngkin, who said he defends the right to work law in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And it's real simple, Chris. You've been introduced to the issue. In fact, Virginia Free, the very first leader of Virginia Free, was a former vice president of the National Right to Work Committee, Clayton Roberts. And it's really exciting to see how not only Virginia Free's grown and the role you play, Chris, in making sure that the people of Virginia understand where candidates stand on the issues. So important that we're informed, and particularly this year.
Well, thanks for saying that, Mark. And my history with this issue goes back when I saw the very first instances of eroding or trying to erode right to work in Virginia during my tenure. I think it was 2005, 2006, maybe. And it was scary that people have, because it's become such a part of Virginia's economic pillar. It's just one of those, one of the cornerstones really for Virginia's economic development and economic reality has been right to work. But over time, people have forgotten what it really is and what it really means. And people go, I support right to work. And you go, do you know what it is? They're like, no, I just support people being able to work. Okay, that's not what we're talking about here. So let's try to define it simply for our audience so that they can understand and go, let's share that around.
Yeah. Well, frankly, what happened back in the 1930s is the federal government took control of private sector labor management relations with the passage of the Wagner Act under the Roosevelt administration. And unions immediately got this tremendous power to compel people not only to pay dues, but to actually join the union. You had to physically be a member of a private organization in order to work in the private sector if the union had representational power in your particular unit. So from 1935 to 1947, Chris, you can imagine the union movement grew dramatically. And in 1946, when the elections turned and Congress looked at what they'd done, in 1947, the Taft-Hartley Act was passed to kind of put amendments onto this power that union officials have been granted. And one of the amendments was giving the states the right to preempt federal law when it came to forced payment of union dues and fees. They said that if a state by affirmative vote could actually outlaw the closed shop, then the state had the ability to do that. And I'll use the word privilege because it's still a privilege to this day. Even though the right to work law is on the statute books in Richmond, it's the federal government that granted Virginia the privilege of passing that. And the law is really simple. The law says that you can participate in a union, you can join a union, you can give your entire paycheck to a union if you want to, but you can't lose your job if you don't. 27 states in America, 5 in the last 9 years have passed right to work laws that basically say the same thing. They say, look, we're not gonna get involved in your decision about being in a union, but we're not gonna let union officials demand that you be fired if you don't pay for the privilege to work. That's the right to work law.
It's that compulsion, that mandate, that force that I think most Americans object to. It's just one of I think a fundamental aspect of being an American. And both political parties use the phrase or the element of freedom when it suits them, but they sort of forget it when it doesn't suit them. And in right to work, I see that in particular. It's like people are pro-choice on this and pro-choice on that, but when it comes to choosing whether you want to join a union or not, suddenly no, they don't. Some people just lose their perspective on this, I think, and I've heard a number of Democratic candidates, incumbents, or consultants who are complaining that their staff is now unionized and they won't, work past 40 hours or, it's more expensive. And I'm like, well, yeah, if you imagine being forced to join one and then being less productive on the job. It's a bad construct in the labor management reality. But I've never opposed anyone who wants to join a union. I don't think any businessman would. Like, if you want to join a union, go right ahead, but don't force me to do it too.
Yeah, that's right. And with that force and that compulsion, and you use the right words, Chris, that's exactly the terms that need to be used to describe this power that union officials have gotten over the American workforce. And basically, they look at the world as a zero-sum game, that somehow, they get in the middle between the relationship of an employee and an employer, and they are the voice. They are the sole voice in the bargaining unit. Any employee can't talk to the boss can't talk to the employees unless they go through this one pipeline that is a union. And frankly, that's really counterproductive. And we've seen that in Virginia. I mean, the right to work law here, while it guarantees the right of the worker to choose whether or not to be associated, it's also helped on the economic front. And Terry McAuliffe has admitted that. Back in his first term, he talked about the importance of having the right to work law in attracting new industry, new opportunities, new jobs, and new investment to the Commonwealth. And every single governor going back to this moment when Terry McAuliffe has said, yeah, I would sign the right to work repeal, has basically said they support Virginia's right to work law. And they support the freedom of the right to work law, and they support the economic vitality that it seems to bring to those states that have it.
Yeah, and I think this is a mistake of McAuliffe's has been on this one in particular, because the economy always has such a big component in elections, especially in Virginia. And this is one of those areas that just hurts economic development. He supported it in the past. There's no reason not to support it going forward. And to say, well, I'll support it, I'll sign it if it gets to my desk, but I'm going to make sure it doesn't get to my desk, is not a sound argument to make.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I wonder how your constituents, when you were in the legislature, would say, look, yeah, I support it, but I will do everything I can to stop it from coming to me making a decision.
Yeah. Virginia Democrats have gotten elected largely for being moderate Democrats and not scary on social issues, and always pointing out when Republicans make mistakes on social issues. And that makes perfect sense. But this is sort of why we're seeing, I think, an erosion of Democratic support, not necessarily on this particular issue, but it adds to that erosion, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the positions of this particular House of Delegates, this particular General Assembly, have been really, really interesting. They've gone after and to enhancing union power by repealing our prohibition against project labor agreements, which are basically union-only construction projects, by repealing Davis-Bacon and allowing union wages to inflate the cost of municipal and state construction projects by up to 30%. And then, of course, introducing a bill to repeal the right to work law. And then probably the worst of all worst, I mean, not that we're pretty focused on protecting the right to work law, but the idea of imposing forced unionization, the idea of compulsory collectivism in the public sector workforce is something that's really interesting. Back in 1993, one of the first projects I worked on when I was working for state legislation here at Right to Work was working with Doug Wilder, believe it or not, to get a statutory prohibition against the recognition of unions when it came to negotiating terms and conditions of employment for government entities here in Virginia. I mean, it came from a Supreme Court decision out of Arlington. They codified it in the legislature. Doug Wilder signed the bill saying, look, this is good for Virginia. And Virginia's profited from that, from being a fiscally responsible state. And yet now we have localities here like Fairfax and Alexandria and a few others that are now negotiating, how the taxpayers are going to have to pay for this new model of government where union officials are in between elected officials and citizens. And it's really scary how this is going to turn out.
Well, we've seen that example in other states and localities, how the public unions and collective bargaining, they say, well, people should be allowed to collectively bargain. Okay, but they also have the pull of the purse, don't they, to sort of create the votes that vote themselves a pay increase. But what has been interesting is some of the localities that have not done collective bargaining. One in particular is Portsmouth. Portsmouth, Virginia has one of the highest tax rates in the state, and they just simply cannot afford to increase their rate of taxation and expect to attract any kind of economic development whatsoever. That's when it comes down to, can you afford it or can you not? And then it becomes that issue of force. Are we going to force the taxpayers to pay for this, or are we not going to force the taxpayers to do this? And are we going to force public employees to join unions as a matter of public policy? I think is very dangerous for our culture and our society going forward. I just think if you want to join it, fine. Private sector, fine. Public sector has not proven to be a successful business model for the public purse, in my estimation.
Well, when you think about it, Christian, you're exactly right about it. When you look at the states that have the quote most mature bargaining systems like Illinois, California, New York, Connecticut, they're basket cases fiscally. And now Virginia's saying that we're gonna be kind of a newborn baby, an infant in this situation. It's going to end the same way with bloated government, higher costs, more taxes, and it's going to destroy that fiscal model that's been kind of the blue star, if you will, of Virginia for all these years.
Yeah, and has served us very well. And all of these positive rankings have come about of our policies. And now they're trying to undo all our policies that made our rankings so good across the board. I just don't understand it. Let's talk about what the National Right to Work Foundation has done in this election cycle here in Virginia. Mark, what I've gotten mail. What else have you been doing?
Well, yeah, we're good at that. And actually, it's the National Right to Work Committee that's doing the legislative work, right? The foundation does the legal work. And so we need to keep that. You understand that, Chris, C4, C3.
No. Well, okay, let's for our audience who doesn't know these things and I don't want to confuse them, and they have to understand that there are legal barriers you have to follow because certain money can't be directed towards certain activities. And that's important to understand in our political dialogue.
Yeah, that's correct. So the National Right to Work Committee is the legislative arm of the Right to Work movement. We're out there following legislation in Virginia, in Washington, across the country. And so the job of the committee right now is to make sure that everyone in Virginia, everyone who supports right to work, who's identified as a right to work supporter, and frankly, anyone who we believe should be a right to work supporter, has been getting mail about a program that we've been running for the last couple of months. And the Legal Defense Foundation, on the other hand, does litigation work. We represent employees. We've been around since 1968. U.S. Supreme Court, 18 arguments there. We won a decision called Janus v. Aspie in 2018 that freed every government employee in the country from being forced to pay dues or fees to work for their government. So that's the Legal Defense Foundation. The committee's the legislative side. And the committee has been very active. And we do kind of some of the things that Virginia Free does. I mean, you get into the details when you interview candidates and you bring them in and you ask them really important questions and they have to answer. I know, Chris, you don't let them get away without answering these questions. On our part, what we do is we send them surveys. We ask them questions about the right to work law, about forced unionism, and what they would do if they were elected to office. And it's really straightforward. I mean, do you support Virginia's right to work law? Do you believe that, workers should be forced to pay dues to a union to get or keep a job? And then our job is to take those answers when they give them and report back to the supporters across Virginia. We've been doing that. We've mailed, you'll get your fourth mailing, I think, probably tomorrow. And then there'll be another one maybe on Monday, Chris. So look at your post office box. All we're saying is this. Glenn Youngkin has indicated his support for Virginia's right to work law.
Right.
Terry McAuliffe has indicated that he would sign the repeal of the law if it got to his desk if he was governor. You need to let them both know how you feel about the issue. Thank Glenn Youngkin for his support for freedom in the workplace, and let Terry McAuliffe know that you're disappointed that he's changed his position and says that forced unionism would be okay in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So this is the time when politicians listen the most. And once they get elected, Chris, I mean, you've been on both sides of the aisle. You've been there, and not to say that you didn't listen to your constituents, Chris. I know you did.
Of course
you did. But the bottom line is, once they're safely elected, then your leverage is dissipated dramatically. So what we did is we surveyed every candidate running for the House of Delegates. We surveyed every candidate running for statewide office. We asked them a question. If they didn't answer, we send them a certified mail saying, hey, we know you got this. Are you just not going to answer? So if they don't answer, then we report back that say, look, they wouldn't answer the question. If they have a voting history, we reported that on how they voted, because we had a vote in the House of Delegates on the repeal of right to work. And we had a vote on monopoly bargaining, the union bargaining for public sector. So we're reporting that information, just basic facts about what's happened, to the members and supporters of the Right to Work Committee in the Commonwealth. And we're urging them to make sure that they make their voices heard before. We don't say vote for or vote against. We don't do that. But what we do is provide information. Just like I remember, and I have maybe one of my associates gets it, but Virginia Free would put out this book that said, here's who we interviewed, here's the questions we asked them, and here's how they answered. And you send that to the members of Virginia Free, which is exactly what we have to do in this grand experiment of self-government. We have to know where the politicians stand. We have to hold them accountable, and we have to make sure the American people, and here Virginians, know what's at stake in this election.
Yeah, we've been trying to do a good job, as you know, Mark. It's difficult to get the message out amongst all the different platforms and sources of information. And unfortunately, and I hate saying this as often as I do, the media has just gotten flat out partisan. And I had Democrats today complaining to me that the press was so partisan this year.
Yeah.
And they can't get, I know y'all can't do partisan stuff, but my difficulty at Virginia Free, and maybe you're seeing this at National Right to Work, is how do we get the message out? How do we get people fully informed so that they make an informed opinion?
Well, I can say, Chris, not only are we using mail, the mailings you've gotten, we've got email going right now. We're putting out emails that are reporting the results in targeted districts across the Commonwealth, basically saying, here's your House of Delegates race. Here's how they answered the survey. So that's happening. We have Google ads and Facebook ads going. We had an op-ed in the Washington Times today. Richmond papers run some information and an op-ed about what's happening with the election. What we got to do is we can't give up on it. We have to be proactive. And if they say no, you just got to keep asking. Chris, I wish I'd have known this when I was in high school and I was looking for dates. If I knew that a no would if I asked 10 people, I'd finally get one yes, then I would have asked 10 people. But once I got the first no, it's like, okay, I give up. It must be me. And but notwithstanding, that principle holds true here in the media. We've got to continue to get the message out. Whether they take it and radiate it is another question. But there are platforms, and we've seen it. That kind of alternative information space is growing, and it's a result of the corporate corrupt media basically saying we're going to let out what we want to let out instead of what we think is news and what's journalism and what our readers should know.
Yeah, it's the democracy dies in darkness. It also dies in partisanship. So
yeah, amen. That's right.
We're going to leave it there. Mark, thanks for joining us today at Virginia Free. We really appreciate the work you're doing to keep freedom as an option for workers in America. That's great work. Great work.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the opportunity. Keep up your good work too, please.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And have a great weekend. Thanks, Mark.